So,
everyone. We hope that you're learning a lot today. The Hussein Global Conference continues. The next topic we have is very, very interesting. It's the geomorphology of Karbala. With us today, I'm proud to welcome Sister Aliya Karmali. She holds a master's in landscape architecture from the University of Toronto, where she completed her thesis on the route between Najaf and Karbala. She currently works with the landscape architecture firm here in Toronto. Her background in the arts and architecture explores the relationship between technology, space, and the human spirit. My name is Reza Jaffrey, and we welcome viewers from all around the world. Sister Aliya, Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
We are so honored to have you join us today and share something that's very near and dear to your heart as well as ours. Your expertise is very valuable. Can you begin, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, with an explanation to the viewers of, for example, what geomorphology is? Because a lot of us have actually heard of geography, but what is geomorphology?
Geomorphology is you taking geography and then morphological studies of the land. So it's the study of how history has shaped the way that land has been formed and how that has then impacted the way cultures have created and changed their traditions. So whatever has happened to the land is directly related to the way that we practice our culture.
Understood. Now, so the land specifically between Najaf and Karbala, why do you feel that it's important to look at that land with a specific lens today?
It's important not solely because we use that route as an Arbaini walk from Najaf to Karbala, because there are a lot of routes to Karbala, and this may be the most populated one. But this site is the land between Najaf and Karbala. It's all actually part of one land. The locals believe that this entire land is considered Wadi as-Salam. Traditionally, we believe Wadi as-Salam is within the boundaries of Najaf, but the locals there believe that it is actually from the burial of the father to the place of the burial of the sons.
Understood. Now, so what we know as modern day Iraq, is this what it's always been known as?
Iraq itself, well, of course, the boundaries have changed, and through colonization, boundaries have been created and destroyed. Najaf itself has a very interesting history, though, because it wasn't how we'd expect it to be. Because when we go there, it's very populated. Many visitors come there. It's extremely developed, but it actually used to be a forested area. And then it moved on from being a forested area to becoming a city for Islamic studies and for the shrine of Imam Ali and this huge cemetery. But the boundaries of the cemetery also keep changing. So I like to think that the boundaries of the city and the boundaries of the cemetery itself are fluid, that no map can actually just draw a boundary. Otherwise, we're colonizing the map. Colonizing the land through mapping, which is something that's a very European thing to do. So a lot of the things I hope that we're talking about today is really, first of all, decolonizing the land through mapping and drawing that is not traditional, and so that we can start to tap into some more important conversations about this land and the culture that it's influenced.
I love that, because there is so much to learn when we start thinking about religion and science, or religion and geography. And now we live in a time where we can use technologies like geospatial mapping, 3D imagery, LiDAR, and understanding the relationship that the land has with the people and cultures is also that sociological side of all of this. How do we tie that in to better understand and grasp this subject?
We can look at in our religious history, in our books, we know what this land was significant for, but there's a huge gap in our history where we just don't know where this land fits in. So we know that it was a land that Prophet Ibrahim had purchased, but then we don't know what's happened after that, or even what happened before that. Who are the people that live there? How did they use agricultural practices or hydraulic infrastructure to shape the land? The land has always been something that humans either indirectly or directly impact, whether like today it's like climate change, but there are those direct responses to human adaptation, such as building dams or building canals or trying to irrigate their crop. And so these sites, the site between Najaf and Karbala, studying it from a lens of history and religious history is super important, but then filling in those gaps, understanding it from the geological point or the geographical, understanding it from the perspective of culture. You know, there was a community, there was a village that lived in Karbala before. Who are these people? How did they use the land? Why was it so significant? Why did they choose to live there? There's so many questions, and that's when we start to complement the religious history with more of the academic and, like you said, the technology that we use in geography today.
Understood. So geographically, this area is located in a historical position within the context of our world. It was known as, I believe, Mesopotamia. Ancient Babylon, which I believe is considered Hilla, is located not too far between Najaf and Karbala. So what is it that I think that now when we're trying to understand the geomorphology of the region, looking back 1400 years ago when Islam came, maybe is not even enough. Maybe we should go back even further. So what do you believe, sister, are the key moments in history, like whether it's natural events and war, because, you know, this region is synonymous to both, unfortunately, but what do you believe? How far back should we begin looking at this to understand how it's been shaped and where it's going?
So I guess everyone will have a different opinion on where history begins. And so my studies, I decided that I'm going to make time zero to be, and I'll show you this image of this timeline that I've created. I chose for it to be 16,000 BCE, which is when the Ice Age ended. And this is when the land started to become what it is today. The geology of it, so the rock structure, just the very basic bones of this land is starting to become shaped. And rivers are drying and rivers are flooding, and the land is becoming something that the properties of the soil is really dictating what can be done on that land. So that's from the Ice Age. But yeah, in this timeline, like when we're thinking about we're talking about the direct ways that humans have impacted this land. It's really from that point up until when this land started to become used as a cemetery, that irrigation and canals really either destroyed the land or helped it. And so we know from like Mesopotamian studies and from like elementary school, the Sumerian cities, like the city of Ur, were created or developed near water bodies. Water bodies are hugely important, but as cities started to grow, water needed to get to those areas. So that's when irrigation became a huge movement towards landform and changing the landform to build more cities. So a lot of this timeline is talking about those irrigation techniques. So I think it's more in the 4th and 3rd millennium BCE when we start to see the fully established irrigation system. and how this is impacting the sea levels around it, like the Gulf Sea. But it's in history, we kind of see how this land, so Najaf was, like I said at the beginning, a forested region. It wasn't inhabited. It was far away from any body of water. There's no way that you can live in this. It was just desert land. And the one thing that this land was good for is that its soil was good for burying bodies. And so the soil dictated the programming of the land. And this may be synonymous with the more historical Islamic hadith, the hadith that we read into. Why was this land, picked the Valley of Peace? So it was 4100 BCE where the ancient Sumerians buried bodies in a cemetery called Kuni Adra. And that's closer to the Najaf airport. So the soil is all very much the same. So there wasn't really, I haven't seen any history about this particular land of Najaf Wadi Islam being used, but there was a cemetery that was used just south of where Wadi Islam is today. And it wasn't obviously until much later that this land was being used actively. So it was in 1 to 2 Common Era where the Jewish had believed that Iraq was actually part of the land of Israel. And they buried their bodies here in Najaf, which is the same location as Wadi Islam. Like if you go to Wadi Islam in the ancient parts, you'll see there's a Jewish area, there's a Christian area, there's Mesopotamian area. But like some of them don't have tombstones, but you can date them back. But this cemetery was called Banakia. And yeah, it was part of the land of Israel. And so it was part of the history of a religion from back to 1 to 2 Common Era.
Understood. So when it comes to ancient prophets, from all three of the monotheistic religions being buried there, is that why there's a correlation, because it was considered a Jewish cemetery?
There won't be any very direct references to that. There's sometimes when you say that this is the area where Prophet Adam was buried, it's very unbelievable to a lot of people. So there's no way to scientifically tell, but in decolonizing this site, you got to really understand that there's what's on paper and what's scientifically proven, and then there's oral traditions that are passed down. And to me, equally important.
Yes.
So like something that your mom has told you for generations and it gets passed down, it's just as important to listen to that and to really, truly believe that is true. You don't really need that the scientific proof for things. You just believe. So that's how we, the local people, and how we as Shias believe it, because we believe the hadith. But there are other hadith of how Prophet Adam got there, how Prophet Nuh got there. About how because the land during that time was shaped differently. There weren't the same rivers, there weren't the same borders that we're seeing today, that it was easier to get from one place like the land of Israel to Najaf. Or maybe there was a huge water body or something and you just have to take a boat or something to get there. So I don't know the specifics, but it's very possible that these civilizations were established in these areas because there were prophets.
Now, since we're on the topic of various religions also having a presence in the Kufa and the greater Kufa Najaf area, I heard that there was also a Buddhist monastery once in that area. Is that something you can shed light on?
Yeah, there was a Buddhist monastery in Wadi Salam. Actually, we have to be careful about the technical terms, because Wadi Salam is the name that was given to the land Imam Ali termed it. So that name came in the 7th century. So anything before that, it wasn't called Wadi as-Salam. So when I talk about Wadi as-Salam, I'm talking about just the land in general, like that Najaf area. But so there was a Buddhist monastery that was there that was discovered. It's if you just search it up, even Buddhist monastery in Najaf, they're just like a plaque that remains. So this forested area was used for many different faiths.
Wow, that's absolutely fascinating, sister. For a lot of us that are learning about this for the first time, to understand that, you know, this area holds significant value throughout history, even in pre-Islamic times. It's just absolutely fascinating. So thanks for sharing that. When it comes to urban design, this is something that's very near and dear to myself, and the transformation of the area. Imam Ali's shrine specifically, where it's located, like you just shared with us earlier, that this was actually a forest. Can you talk more about the transformation between the time before Imam Ali's shrine was located there and then after?
Yeah. So we'll go back to, I have a couple images that can probably help me describe it better. So
Amazing.
just go.
Love visuals.
Going back to this timeline, the first Muslim burial is by the name of a man named Safi Safa. So if you go to Najaf, or even if you just go on Google Maps, you'll see just nearby Imam Ali's shrine, there's the burial of Safi Safa. And Safi Safa is a man who he was a deceased individual. His son brought him over Bahr al-Najaf. And Imam Ali liked to go and stand on the mountain and just like contemplate. And he saw this, this boat coming in. He greeted them, and the son said that in the will of his father, he wanted to be buried here in Najaf because it was, there would be a man who was extremely pious that would later on be buried here. And so it was in his will, so Safi Safa was buried. And that man is Imam Ali. So the man who buried him is the man that was talked about in his will. So that was the first Muslim burial. And then we come into the same century, Imam Ali is buried secretly. And we know that from traditions. It wasn't until 12th century when Harun al-Rashid, there's a hadith that we know that he was going hunting.
He was hunting, yeah.
Hunting, and his dogs didn't want to go into this certain area. It was a sanctified area, and he just, no matter what he tried, the dog didn't go there. And so he started to ask around, and the Imam told him that is the burial of Imam Ali. So that is when people started coming in. And when the city started to invite others and invite agricultural practices and irrigation practices. So that's how it started. Wadi Islam started. And I'll pull up another image of
so and this is probably why it's located on the extremities of Kufa, because it wasn't actually inhabited before. But now when we go to Najaf, we see that there's very dense population, and we don't even the airport is referred to as Najaf Airport rather than Kufa.
Yeah, actually Najaf is the name was derived because from the two words Nay and Jaf, meaning dried river. So it was the mountains, or the topography was created because of drying rivers. And then it just was shortened into Najaf, and it was basically the backyard of Kufa.
Understood. So it's fair to say that this was very lush land at one time, not the desert that we see today.
Yeah, well, and as much as when we think of lush land, there are the different types of plants that we would think as lush, like oasis sort of landscape typologies, that we can go into a little more. Like it's a different plant typology when we get there. I'm just pulling up this image. So it is, sorry. Okay, so let's look at this one. So we have in 3500 BCE to 1000. The reason I did the study is to see how the Euphrates River moved and was transformed, because the avulsions of the Euphrates River speaks directly to the transformations that were happening through large hydraulic infrastructure like dams, but also how that created spaces for people to live. So in the first image, we see that the Euphrates River is this very like linear line, and where Najaf is, there's no water access to it. But as we move a little bit closer to the 20th century, we see that there's a huge change in the way that the Euphrates River, and the bold line is actually the main course of the Euphrates River, how that has now reached Najaf. So right over here, it's now reached Najaf through a series of canals and irrigation, hydraulic infrastructures.
Understood. So this map for the viewers can probably explain why more ancient civilizations within that geographic area were located more east or northeast of what actually Najaf is today. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah. More wherever there was water, that's where the cities were established. And so nobody could live in Najaf until water could get there. And obviously people wanted to live there because Imam Ali's burial is there. So there's actually this one other image that I really wanted to show you.
This is absolutely phenomenal.
And this speaks to like the cemetery itself. Now it's if I'll send it over for sure, and then we can get like more close-ups of it. But it's I'll explain it. It's a diagram of the city of Najaf and how it has expanded over time, and what sort of time or key moments were created. So I have it over here. So at the bottom, that's where we see where Prophet Adam is born, where was buried, where Safi is buried, and this is called the Old City of Najaf. And then it expanded. We have Banakia, that's over here.
Yeah.
And then many prophets, such as Prophet Hud and Saleh, are buried in this region. Then we see a huge difference in the patterning, which indicates that an existing or sort of a contemporary way of burying bodies is being used. And so that's like a huge demarcation point, which is the 1980s. The Saraya Salam, that cemetery was created to bury those who died in the Iraq-Iran war. And now we have the cemetery is expanding. If you go into the newer parts, it's very empty still. And Oreza, you were telling me that your grandmother.
Yes, so I was actually discussing this with Sister Aliya, I believe like last week. We were talking about the cemetery and how Imam Ali's shrine is not located directly off the highway, the transport route between Najaf and Karbala, and it's located a little deep, like further away, because the cemetery continues to expand. However, when in 2016, when I had the opportunity to be invited to Najaf and Karbala, I was between Najaf, between Prophet Hud and Prophet Saleh, where they're located, where they're buried, is my father's sister. She passed away when she was on a ziyarat trip, on a pilgrimage to the region, and she was able to be blessed enough to be buried there. So it's literally right on the main road as you're exiting Najaf to head towards the highway. So I when you speak of this area, like I what I saw was just probably a drop in the bucket compared to how large and expansive this region is. And when we check on Google Earth, it just gives you goosebumps knowing that you're looking at the largest cemetery in the world.
It's huge. I went there with some contacts just to study some more and just to get in. I'm assuming that, yeah, your grandmother will be buried somewhere around here, which is pretty insane because the newer burials are like like expanding when we're more northward. So she's very close to Mama Ali, which is awesome.
This is why, sister, like it's unbelievable how it happened, and you know, she's absolutely so blessed to be there, and we're fortunate enough to be able to access it very easily, because as you know, there's generations of families buried within crypts as well, and a lot of them are you know, due to time, they're collapsing, or they need a lot of repairs. But you know, hers is right there, and I believe it's near pole 401 as you're exiting. And sadly, when I was there, at my pupo's grave, my father's sister's grave, and we were reciting Fatiha, it was 2016, so I believe every 1 or 2 minutes there was bodies passing by, coming in towards the shrine, because they were soldiers that were fighting for the safety and security of the Iraqi people, and their bodies were coming back from the front lines.
Yeah, and you'll see when you go into the cemetery, there are pictures of or images of men or sons, and that's actually what really drove my project, is this trauma. Like even just looking at this diagram right now, seeing how much this has expanded, and it's like 7 million bodies through millennia, right? And it's not like, it's not even just this is Wadi Islam. The area that is Najaf, the area that is the city, the shrine of Imam Ali, you're walking on graves.
Yeah. Like
there are many scholars who are buried right beside Imam Ali. The whole courtyard is built on graves. The entire city is built on graves. So when we're estimating 7 million, we're not even counting those bodies.
Wow.
This entire area is Wadi Salam, and it is full of trauma. The land has seen so much injustice. And it really begs to ask, like, are we helping the land in any way get over this trauma? And how is the land helping us get over our traumas, or the traumas of the mothers who lost their sons, the traumas of wives and daughters? And just working with how the way the land is already formed, the way that the Euphrates River is now channeled into the land, the way that the use of canals and irrigation techniques and huge hydraulic infrastructure, and how this cemetery itself is already going northwards towards Karbala. We got to use all of that and start to think of this land differently, like a land that can heal us and a land that we can heal itself. Like it's like, I'll just show you in this image. There's so much space as it's going up towards Karbala. It's they built a border around the cemetery, so there's a fence or like a concrete wall depending on where you are, and that's Wadi Salam. Right? That despite the local beliefs, despite the oral traditions, a geographer will want to colonize through mapping. So these are the boundaries of Wadi Islam as we know it from Google Earth or Google Maps. But they left a 50-meter wide opening right over here.
Yep.
As a nod to that local belief that this land in between Najaf and Karbala is all Wadi Islam.
Wow. So the reason why it's very important to mention, you know, this small space that they've allocated is because urban sprawl continues to be a problem right now, because Najaf is experiencing, I believe, rapid growth, and so is Karbala.
Mm-hmm. Especially Karbala, there are a lot of different organizations or hospitals, schools being established. A lot of people living there. Najaf, it's harder to live there. There's a lot of empty residential plots. A lot of the families have moved out, or during Saddam's reign, were kicked out. So a lot of empty historic plots that need to be further studied to see how it fits into the grander urban development. But there are a lot of hotels being built in Najaf.
Yes, very apparent with all the cranes that we see now.
Yeah, and when you actually go, so the Bahr al Najaf, I went there for the first time. It's not something that you just go to. I went there just because I really needed to see for myself how the sea looks like.
Mm.
It's on the west side of Najaf. We don't normally go there, but when I went there, because of the rapid urbanization, there are already hotels being built there, being
Wow.
advertised as like the lakeside hotel.
Now, this is a salt lake, right? On the
It's
just
a,
for
it's a,
the purposes
yeah,
of understanding, I believe this is what, like 30 kilometers northwest of Najaf?
yeah. So it's extremely saline. It has dried up in the past. It does flood a little bit here and there, but it's not consistent enough,
Mm-hmm.
and the habitats are not consistent enough. And it's really due to all the urbanization.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there was this hotel that's being built, and the the point of the dome, or the respect that you give to the dome and the entire nation gives to the dome, is that even if you go all the way to Kufa, you can still see the dome of Imam Ali. But now these hotels are blocking the view. And the respect that you give to the shrine of Imam Ali is that it sits on a certain like height,
Mm-hmm.
the topography, and no hotels or anything should be built higher than that, so that your eye can always see Imam Ali's dome.
That's correct. So it is built on somewhat of a hill, and that's why the stone that comes out of there, for example, I believe it's called Dur Najaf, just like this. And is there a significance as to why the stone is specifically from that area?
Was, as far as I know about quartz, so Dur Najaf is a quartz, is that certain ecological or cycles create the quartz.
Mhm.
And so that area specifically, the pressure on the stone from the water and the drying up really quickly creates that quartz.
Yeah.
Which I think is really cool in the sense that with my thesis, it was this relationship that people have with the land, and that the land can heal you and you can heal the land, because we're one and the same. And so people are, by wearing Dur Najaf, are actually wearing the land, and you're really embracing the land.
So what kind of like on the ground support, like networks or organizations or universities should be are engaged in this kind of work, do you believe? Or should there be a lot more work, especially from organizations outside of the country? Because something that I learned a lot visiting there and then speaking to you as well as others is that there's a lot of the traffic, for example, at the mokifs between Najaf and Karbala is international organizations. So when it comes to healing the lands and sustainability and self-reliant communities, what are your thoughts on this?
We definitely have to go back to the route for Arba'in. So I have this image that I can show. And this image, so we have Najaf at the bottom and then Karbala at the top. And this is the 80 kilometers, 80 to 90 kilometers that you walk on towards Karbala from Najaf. And there are so many mokibs, a lot of just every pool you go to, right? And I haven't been on the walk, but just talking to people, there are mokibs that are like established, and then they're just mokibs that are just tables, right? And people are coming from all over the world to do this. So there are a lot of international organizations, especially Iranian ones, that are sponsoring some mokibs. And volunteers come from the country, and then they're there for Arba'in, and then they leave. So we just think of the Arba'in route as just like a one-time thing, but it's actually a very active route. There's a lot of history, and there's a lot of painful history, and a lot of opportunities for growth. And one of the locals that told me that there are people from Najaf that go every Thursday night to Karbala, and they reach there Friday, like afternoon, and then they come back. So something that takes 3 days, like we would think like 3 to 10 days. They're so used to it, they just go and I walk it every single week, and then they come back. And you ask, like, how are they living? Well, there are mokibs there because the local people are still there, and they are, well, the huge ones are not operating. They're just vacant. But then there are the ones that the locals have established themselves, and they are serving the zawar even after Iraqin.
Subhanallah. So there were some more maps that I believe that you wanted to share with us when it comes to sustainable development, expansion, urban design, how we can effectively adapt to the massive growth that it's experiencing, but also, keep the importance of the land and its healing principles in mind as the land continues to develop.
Yeah. So this image is a list of a plant palette, which is always growing, but it's a list made up of remediatory plants.
Mm-hmm.
So plants that are going to clean up the soil and the water, and plants that are medicinal from indigenous knowledge, the people that are indigenous of this nation, from the ancient Sumerians, who were then introduced to the nomadic Arab tribes, and that medicine started to come together and develop. And these plants were used for medicinal value that are still used today. And so we have remediatory, we have medicinal, and then we have crop, like food, agriculture. It's huge there. Like when you're walking, you're going to see just vast land of farms. And how do we make these nations, these villages, more self-sufficient or self-reliant? Is if they really just tap, or if I know there are a lot of barriers in place, but these villagers are the descendants of those who hold this incredible knowledge. If there's anyone that's going to be able to understand how to use this knowledge and to practice it, it would be them. And it would be a great opportunity for organizations that are international and local to be tapping into this and creating a self-reliance for these communities to flourish using their practices and feeding themselves from indigenous ways of knowledge.
That's absolutely so when it comes to what our imams say about land or about this specific area, do we have any relationships to the geomorphology of the region based on what our imams have taught us?
Well, in terms of taking care of our land, 100%, that we are the caretakers of this land. And there is the hadith. I'll just read it out to you because I do have it here. And it is, I'll summarize it actually, that when the imam of our time reappears, he will be the one to make it so that the land will give sufficient resources so that nobody will be in need. And in order to prepare our land or prepare for the time of his coming, we really have to make that effort. That this land, we believe, is shifa, like the land of Wadi Salam, the land of the burial of Imam Ali, and the land of Karbala. It's shifa. But if we may not live in the region, but it is still our responsibility to take care of it. We genuinely we are 100% certain that this is the land of heaven. Then we have to do our part.
Absolutely. I thank you so much, Sister Aliya, for teaching us about the geomorphology of the land beyond Karbala, actually between Najaf and Karbala. The wealth and the wisdom that you've shared with us, we're absolutely appreciative. I urge everybody watching, especially the youth, to continue to learn about these kind of topics and share with others, because there are treasures beyond treasures, and this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to geomorphology and the land of Karbala. Jazakallah everyone for joining. I want to thank Sister Aliya Karmali for being with us today. from myself, Reza Jaffrey, and everybody at the Hussein Global team, we thank you, and we pray that everybody at home watching is in the best of health, and everybody that's about to depart on this Ziyarah trip for this year comes home safely. Jazakallah, and we'll see you soon.